This is that 63 Fender concert. You can see the new phenolic output sockets with bear traps. Redid everything in the filter caps board. 2-watt drop-in resistors throughout. Caps secured with silicone. Everything done the way I've shown in other videos. This amp originally had two 20 microfarad caps, 600 volt caps in parallel. You cannot get 600 volt caps in axials these days. So instead of having a cumulative 40 microfarad here, I have 200 microfarads in series. This looks like parallel, it's really series. There's a jumper from here to here underneath the board, which gives me 50 microfarad. You're not going to hear a difference between 50 and 40, especially given cap tolerances. So this gives me 600 volt handling, and the unloaded B plus is just about 500, so we're good here. We go to the insides. All right, with the exception of this wire, I left the bias board as it was. The previous tech had done a good job there. I did float the center tap for the heater secondary and added the 100 ohm half watts to give the artificial center tap. Did all the grounds properly to chassis. Redid the wiring, the power wiring to safety code. You can see the replaced sockets with new grounds without the 1 ohm cathode measuring resistors. New 3-watt screen grids. Some new heater wire here where the old stuff had burned a long time ago. You can see the heat damage from all that previous stuff. That burn on that primary was not my work. I doubt it was the work of the guy before me either, but while it looks ugly, the insulation is still solid there, so that's fine. With the exception of these 4 carbon films, which I matched to each other, exact measurements on those 470Ks and on those 100Ks, that's pretty crucial on the circuit. All the other resistors are all carbon composites, making it 1963 again. The SM labeled caps here and here on the treble part of the tone stack have been changed out for ceramic discs. The ones which are just labeled SM tend to fail. These caps here, these 4, the blue Ajax are a little bit out of spec, and in a lot of places in a Fender, it doesn't matter if the cap's a little bit out of spec, but in this Harmonic Tremolo, it does matter. And this amp just had a mismatch of different caps, with the exception of these 4 that are in the LFO for the tremolo. I took out all the mismatched stuff and just put in all 6PS polyester orange drops throughout, just for consistency. I cleaned up the board a lot. You can see the wiring that I replaced up top with some fresh stuff, including the run to the treble pot. The intensity pot, I would prefer to change it. It's got a little bit of a noise at the extreme, either extreme, but you cannot get a 10 meg pot these days unless you want to order 10,000 of them. And it is still working just fine. You just live with a little bit of noise at the extremes. Other than that, everything is fine. I'll let you hear it a little bit through its cab, then I'll show the cab, and then you'll get a real playing video of this soon. Alright, here's what it sounds like on the normal, i.e. non-vibrato channel. And then if we go to the vibrato channel, the tremolo channel, here's what it sounds like without tremolo. I can't do this very loud or for very long. My wife's doing a conference call upstairs. Here's the tremolo. as you can hear, if I turn it all the way down, is that little thud sometimes? Not all the time. That's the pot. Like I said, I can't change that out. And if I turn it up to the extremes, I get a little bit of the thudding. But they all do that. It's a very temperamental circuit. It's hard to get it dialed in this good, which is one of the reasons I think they went to the opto trim after 63. Now, someone was asking, actually a couple of people were asking about what makes this trim special. And without doing a full video just on that with charts and stuff, I'm going to run the risk of oversimplifying. What happens is you have a very standard oscillator like you have in other Fenders, much like you'd find in the Deluxes and things like that, or the Princeton. And that oscillator then goes to what is essentially a phase inverter. So the LFO pulse is going to two different points in the circuit at that point, and each pulse is out of phase with each other, and there's a time split there. Similarly, at the same time, the signal coming out of the tone stack on this channel is split into two parts, which feed two different triodes. And the highs go to one triode and the lows go to another. And each of those triodes then has the LFO applied to that. So while it's not a perfect thing, it's turning down the highs at the same time it's turning up the lows. And then when it turns down the lows, it's turning up the highs. But because it's not a hard and set, all the highs are here, all the lows are here, you get that phase cancellation in the middle where you get that phaser kind of sound. And it's very Dark Side of the Moon approved. You'll hear it more when we do the real playing video. So in a nutshell, the regular Fender tremolo that you're used to is just doing this like I can do on the volume on my guitar. Just rolling the volume up and down. What this is doing is it's rolling all the highs up and down, and it's rolling all the lows up and down, but they're reversed from each other. So when the highs come up, the lows go down, and vice versa, as you can kind of hear. I think this is probably a happy accident. They were probably trying to do an exact things with the highs and the lows. But because of the phase interesting stuff that's happening, that's a terrible phrase. Because it sounds so cool, I think it's accidentally really awesome. Gives the same benefit to most players that, you know, a chorus or phaser pedal would. It just makes it fun to play. Everything sounds good. It's very comforting. It kind of hides some mistakes, you know. And, you know, in 1960, when the world first heard this would have been really ground shaking because, you know, the electro-harmonics, the phasers and all were not coming out till another decade. And, you know, the magnetone stereo trim was an entirely different thing. This was a really cool sound, but it's really parts intensive. It's very specific, and it was really hard to get these working right on every amp from the factory. So this one is working right, and it should stay working right for a long, long while. But in general, having worked on a lot of these and owning a Strymon Flint, I'd say that most people would be just as happy running a Strymon Flint into the normal channel of a Super Reverb or Deluxe Reverb, etc., etc. The harmonic trim on that comes, I'd say, about 95%. That said, I have compared a Pro with a concert, you know, a 62 Pro with a 63 concert. Each one of these sounds a little bit different from each other. So the Strymon is really good at getting in that ballpark that the others all occupy similar space in that same ballpark. None of them are identical, so the Strymon's not identical, but it does get that vibe. The rest of the difference between this amp and the later AB763 Fenders is very minor. They've got that tapped treble pot, which Fender abandoned because it really didn't give that much of a benefit compared to what they went to later, which is just a stock pot with 3 lugs. The rest of the circuit's fairly identical to what you'd find in any non-reverb Fender. So while these are cool, I don't think that they are necessarily worth seeking out and spending a lot of money on, particularly since that pot is impossible to get if one should die. That said, if you have it, use it. All right, when I first looked at this, I thought, what in the wide world of sports is going on here? But what we have are 4 ceramic speakers from the period. They are 16 ohms rather than the proper 4 ohms, which means that this amp has a 4 ohm load instead of the proper 2 ohm load. Now, as to that, while I would not order these speakers for this amp, it is up to the owner whether he replaces these speakers. They sound fine. That 4 ohm mismatch with a Schumacher output transformer is not going to hurt the amp. You're going to lose a little bit of volume, that's it. It is a safe mismatch as such things go. Now, I'm not recommending that you intentionally do impedance mismatches, and it's not the same for every amp. But for this concert, I don't think it's going to hurt it. So it's up to the owner whether he replaces that. But it has all this nonsense here. And what someone did was they wired it so that this speaker is always on. And with a switch in this position, you just have all 4 speakers. So normal 4 ohm load. When you flip the switch here, you get this speaker in parallel with this giant resistor. So you have the same 4 ohm load ish, so you have all the power of the amp going into just the one speaker, and you get a big volume drop. I don't recommend that for a couple of reasons, and I'm just going to tell the owner just not to mess with the switch unless he wants me to remove it. But I think it's kind of cool to leave it in. I might just move a couple of wires here so that the switch is not doing anything. But the reason I don't suggest this is that I don't know that the balance of wattage between this resistor and this speaker are going to be equal, and I think it will be hard on this speaker to handle the full output even in parallel with this. Second of all, a purely resistive load like this, while it's fine for testing an amp, in actual use it's really hard on output transformers, even a Schumacher. So I think this was someone's attempt to be clever. Judging by the technology, I'd say 70s, 80s. It's clever but not wise, if you know what I mean. So, but I think it looks pretty funky and neat. So I think what I'm going to do is just move some wires so that these 2 wires here, or rather the speaker wire and the wire coming in on the plug, are always just going to go to here. And this will actually, the switch and this will actually be out of the circuit totally, won't be doing anything. So it'll still have the funky old stuff in there, and got some loose hardware. I need to tighten that up, and if that doesn't tighten, I need to replace it. So this is pretty simple stuff. I'll do all that and then show you the after, and then maybe we'll get a real playing video. Okay, well, I don't have a screw quite long enough, a number 10 wood or sheet metal screw quite long enough here, so I gotta go to the hardware store. And as we have an ice storm today, that can wait a little bit. All this funky nonsense is being left here, but is now disconnected, and the switch does nothing. So it just got all 4 speakers on all the time. Still at a 4 ohm load rather than the ideal 2, but unless the owner wants to go spend $200 to $400 on new speakers, I think it'll be fine. And these old ceramics seem to sound just fine, so I look forward to the playing video on this. One thaw followed by a quick trip to the hardware store later.